I would now like to welcome Susan, or Susie, Bates, the Director of the Office of Aviation Services, to introduce our next keynote speaker. She has had 39 years of government service and started in public service while still in high school. Susie has a diverse background working as an engine crew person, helicopter manager, smoke jumper, and forest dispatcher, and has served in aviation leadership positions with the BLM, the United States Forest Service, National Park Service, and Department of Interior. Thank you for introducing our next keynote speaker. Susie, if you'd take the stage.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome, everyone, to our next keynote address. I'm Susie Bates. I'm the Director of the Office of Aviation Services for the Department of the Interior, and I'm based here in Boise, Idaho. And it is my honor today to introduce our next speaker. Our next keynote speaker is someone who is able to make those she is speaking to know they have her attention. Today, we will learn more about her journey to become the leader that she is now. I have the privilege to work for and with Ms. Joan Mooney, who serves as the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy and Management and Budget for the Department of the Interior, and is exercising the delegated authority as the Assistant Secretary for PMB. In this role, she oversees a variety of management and operations offices to include administrative services, budget and finance, human capital, but also public safety and emergency management. She's also the co-chair for the Wildland Fire Leadership Council to assist with coordinated efforts across agencies to address wildland fire management and mitigation. Joan also leads the department's level policy initiatives on critical issues like climate change, sustainability, invasive species, Native Hawaiian relations, and others. She serves as the department's Chief Sustainability Officer, Chief Financial Officer, and Chief Real Property Officer, among many other roles and functions. Joan was called to public service and worked her way on the Hill to being Chief of Staff for an Oregon member of Congress. After leaving the Hill, she served as the President and CEO of the Faith and Politics Institute, where she worked closely with lawmakers, federal officials, and the Honorable Representative John Lewis. Joan leads from her heart, which shows in her interactions with people from all levels and backgrounds. One of my favorite trips with Joan was to Yosemite National Park when we visited one-on-one with the search and rescue volunteers and the park's first responders. She is as comfortable in those situations as she is briefing Congress. I value and admire Joan's genuine care for the people, the land, and the missions she is responsible for. She truly embodies a leader that stays true to her values while uplifting others and being an advocate for those in the field. Joan has definitely inspired me in my role and others with her positive energy and devotion to both family and the people she meets. I'm delighted and honored to introduce her, so without further ado, please help me in welcoming Ms. Joan Mooney.
Oh my gosh, that was beautiful. Thank you so much. Thanks so much, Susie. Susie, I want to say, is the Director of Aviation Services. Her team leadership ensures that we have safe and secure operations for our workforce, our contractors, and the public we serve. She's an absolute expert at what she does, and she's highly respected by her team and her colleagues. And more than that, she brings the light into every room and all of our conversations, and most importantly, brings calm into crisis. She mentioned meeting with the young search and rescue folks. This isn't just anybody. I'm going to go all fangirl. We met Nick Amon, who broke Alex Hanold's nose speed record on El Capitan. So that was absolutely an incredible experience. And you know why he did it that day? It just felt like a good day to do it. He was feeling good in the morning when he was climbing the ropes, and he made it. So I want to say thank you to the leadership and the team here at the Andrus Center. It's an incredible transformation event you put on with this conference, and as someone who has put on large group events, I know how much work it takes from everybody on this team. So I want to say thank you to everybody. I love a good retreat, and I marvel at the range of leaders that participate in this conference, the lessons you're learning, as well as those of us who have the opportunity to share our stories. Two things I know for sure. Everyone is fighting a great battle we know nothing about, so be kind. And that we couldn't survive in this world without one another, let alone lead positive change. We can learn from one another, be inspired by one another, and appreciate the differences between us. Day by day, whether we're leading ourselves or others, leadership takes courage. And this is a photograph of me on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, which is a National Park Service property that we steward. So I want to talk today about leading with courage. Courage is kind of the word that I rely on the most these days. So courage is the strength of mind to carry on in spite of danger or difficulty. And it comes from the Middle English courage, or from the Anglo-French courage, from cœur, heart, or the Latin core. And I hope to speak with you today from the heart. The late author and poet laureate, artist, and human rights activist Maya Angelou said further that courage is the most important of all the virtues, because without courage, you can't practice any other virtue consistently. You can practice any virtue erratically, but none consistently without courage. So we exercise courage pretty regularly in all of our lives. Sometimes we think about the word courage differently, like bravery, walking into life-threatening situations. But we all step into courage all the time. When we start out in the workforce, when we take on that new project, even though we can't yet see the resources or path to conclusion, when we get married or start a family, or when we switch workplaces or careers midlife. Any time that we put ourselves out there is an opportunity to exercise courage. It's been said that courage is not the absence of fear, but rather the judgment that something else is more important than fear. While my leadership journey started out focusing on strengthening the courage to achieve positive, peaceful, and just change in my community, the nation, and the world, it took a turn inward to courage for myself in facing some personal challenges and support of others going through similar battles. This is me. I'm the little one in the middle, probably walking towards my wonderful mother, but my father is taking that photograph. My dad worked on the Quonset huts on the mall where the Vietnam Memorial is now, but those were the Department of the Navy buildings. This is probably sometime in 1963, most likely after the March on Washington that occurred right there. And when I was growing up in the DC suburbs, I was surrounded by public servants and military members. And I paid attention to the adults I grew up around who'd overcome unimaginable hardships and had to take on incredible risk, but who didn't stop learning, loving, or endeavoring to do better when they failed. They still inspire that virtue of courage in me. This is my dad. As a young man, he was in the Coast Guard in the Marshall Islands. He happened to serve there during over 24 nuclear tests. He died of a service-connected cancer later in life in the 2000s, little older than the age I am now. And it shows here the insidious effects of service. I admired the interesting and sometimes daring stories from him, from my grandparents, who had certainly seen the world and helped shape their communities and the nation. And so this is a photograph of a brownstone in New York City. My family came from Brooklyn, New York. My grandfather and my grandmother, in the early half of the last century, my grandfather lived in Warsaw, Poland, in an aristocratic family, and his father came to America to start a new life in business. And then the unimaginable happened, and my grandfather's mother died. His father was still in America. He and his sister Felicia were sent to go live on a farm. They actually lived in a barn. That was the place where they were given to live until they could figure out what to do with the two of them and how to get them to my great-grandfather in America. Newspaper around the feet, burlap, twine were their shoes, and my grandfather, Mieczysław, and his sister Felicia ended up traveling as in their early teens, alone together across Europe, as I understand, around the First World War. What I loved about my grandfather is an introvert, and I could just spend time in peace next to him. I remember a tattoo he had on his forearm, the American eagle, and through it there was a ribbon in the eagle's mouth, and it said, "E pluribus unum," out of many one. And what I remember about that is we'd often talk together, and I would ask him questions about his upbringing. He had diverticulitis. He had to eat baby food his whole life, and I said, "How can you do that?" And he said, "I would do anything to live with the hope and promise of this great nation of ours." And that I held with me. My grandmother, his wife, supervised hundreds of women in a factory. She was always conflicted about working in and outside the home. Both sets of great-grandparents lived with them, and they cared for my father while she and my grandfather were working. They cared about their local community, diverse local community, people of all ethnicities living together in harmony in their neighborhood. And this is a photograph of my maternal grandmother. Huge impact on me. Another introvert, telling me stories, but one that I spent time with, listening to what she'd gone through. Her mother also died of tuberculosis when she was just little, and she and her 3 sisters were sent to an orphanage. She kept the family together. She had a job as a telephone operator, fought for women's rights, was a union organizer in the workplace. So every summer I spent with my extended family back and forth between their neighborhoods in Brooklyn. I love to hear their stories. And their stories weren't anything that I'd heard about very deeply from the history books that I loved. They were personal and authentic to their own experiences. And they taught me to hone resilience if I wanted to achieve goals and I wanted to have longevity. Along with their stories, my family gave me plenty of time and space for imagination and free range to dream big and pursue just about anything. And so I did. I've heard Sir Richard Branson, who's known for innovation and success in a wide range of business and philanthropic endeavors, say, "The brave may not live forever, but the cautious may not live at all." At age 14, this grandmother and I got on the subway, went down to Whitehall Street in Lower Manhattan, and I got a work permit where I began to work in a publishing house on my summers when I was in high school. And back in the day, you remember those cards you get in magazines that are for subscriptions? You write your name and address, you used to mail them in, etc. I was the person who typed the plates 40 hours a week without the benefits of an iPhone or a Walkman to distract me in the names and addresses. But I loved the job. I loved the independence. I loved the freedom that my grandmother, that my aunt gave me in taking the subway from Brooklyn to Manhattan and back every day. And that sense of adventure really followed me through life. So I hope this makes sense at some point. I promise it will. It's a data point to me. I'd also been a competitive Irish dancer since I was very little. And when I was a teenager and then young adult, I traveled by myself, by car or plane, around the country and around the world competing. I always had a fascination for art and culture, as well as history. It's been a lifelong passion to preserve them, which figures into what I do now, as well as share them with others, which I hope I do now. And I want to experience and share the experience of the richness of other people's history and culture. The beauty is in the mix. And so, when I was at university, I headed the Public Affairs Association that brought speakers to campus. And one of them was a New York Times reporter, John Conroy. I'd asked him for some names and contacts of his experience in Northern Ireland. He'd covered Northern Ireland at the height of the political conflict there. And so I asked him for names and contacts, wrote letters, and after the World Championships in Irish dance in Dublin one year, I was off to meet with people who were making history, moving communities forward from violence between British loyalists and Irish nationalists. They'd begun the process of more active participation in the democratic process and standing as candidates for political office. It also began a lifelong fascination and study of what makes some people courageous in working for change in the face of difficulty or adversity, or resilient under repetitive stress, and what makes others give up, and what tools we can give ourselves and others to flourish. I came back to DC after several years of growing abroad to get more engaged in US politics and government. And so where did I go? But here. The United States Capitol, the House of Representatives, and I see some students here among the group. Like most college graduates, I figured, with my vast experience, I expected to be making immediately some amazing contributions in public service, and I did. I started by opening mail and answering telephones on Capitol Hill. I was on the front lines of engaging with the public and understanding their concerns before Congress and the federal government. And my mom would say, leadership is action, not position. Every job is what you make of it. I learned the ropes, learned legislation, learned the entrance of various House members and senators they were working on together, how different communities through different issues thought they would affect them, and generally relating to the public and peers with whom I often disagreed. How could we forge coalitions to get things done? Now that I'm in the Department of Interior's Chief Information Officer, but then I was my own large language model, taking everything in. The most valuable entry-level job that still impacts me today. General Eric Shinseki, for whom I would later work, would say he could never fix a problem he couldn't see. And it's hard to repair something with a 2,000-mile screwdriver. Starting out in the field and working your way up is invaluable. I begin and end every day today. What have I done for the people in the field and for the public? Respecting wisdom and experience, but not getting too fixated on the trapping of the role matters not only to the team you lead, but it should matter to you. I work for a member of Congress from Southern Illinois. His name is Terry Bruce. He served on one of the most prestigious committees in the House of Representatives, the powerful Energy and Commerce Committee. And working with him, I focused on what mattered to the people at home. He was responsible for landmark environmental protection legislation, including the Clean Air Act amendments of 1990, energy policy, telecommunication policy, healthcare legislation, nutritional labeling. But first and foremost, he wanted to work towards bettering the lives of people in his district. He is a good person still. Was raised in a rural community and taught me probably the best example I could have growing up. Sometimes we put leaders on a pedestal and we fail to recognize that leaders are people just like everybody else. And so he taught me that great example that there's not much to be gained from kissing up and kicking down. We need everybody flourishing because we have unlimited work to do. And stay humble. At events, what I remember most about him is he was the first one there. He'd be unloading the truck, bringing things in, helping the team set up, and he would be the last one who closed the tailgate of the truck at the end of the event or the night, waving goodbye and making sure his staff and the team got on their way well. One day we'd come through this important negotiation on legislation, and I thought, oh my gosh, well, he's been at the White House, et cetera. I said, Terry, what are you doing this weekend to relax? And he said, I'm going to change my oil. And I thought, God, he's living just like me. So being real and keeping it real with the people with whom you work is super important. And I just want to say a few words speaking to the fact that leadership is action and not position. In one of my congressional chiefs of staff role, I had a remarkable person, Anne Marie Feeney, who was our executive officer. And the lessons she taught to me were to treat people who come to DC and into our office like they were being welcomed home. And in fact, when you're in the House of Representatives, there's a verb in that, and it's called represent. So those offices, the federal government, it's not some strange thing miles away in Washington, D.C. We're all part of serving in a participatory democracy. And so the more people felt like this was their home, they had a place to go to express their views, was amazing. We lived together through 9/11, and Anne Marie made sure that everybody that was in the building that day got out safe, got home safe, their planes were taken care of, we ultimately got people settled, et cetera. Caring for people, first and foremost, I remember Rick Shinseki saying, people don't care how much you know till they know how much you care. And Anne Marie cared. She counted the number of steps exactly from our office down to the exit of the building. In case we were ever bombed or anything ever happened, we knew we had safety. Then when I was at Veterans Affairs, my administrative officer, Regina McAbney, every day she prepared me for every eventuality completely. I couldn't have done my work without her diligence and standards of excellence for our team. Likewise, now I have a chief of staff, Rotimi Abimbola. The office that I lead is high-ranking within the Department of Interior, but Rotimi's spirit is one of grace, is one of fellowship, and she sets all of us up for success. This is a person who truly, truly cares and is an amazing public service. And what I've picked up along the way, slowly but eventually, for myself, is that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So work on connecting. To paraphrase General Shinseki, leadership requires love. Command is a hollow experience filled with distrust. You can do it, but it won't be as effective or long-lasting. So stay humble and stay connected. And after 2 decades on the Hill, I went to work for these two gentlemen. So I started out working under President Obama's administration as a senior advisor at the Department of Veterans Affairs. I was focused on getting our 2009 and 2010 budget through the Congress. And that was a lot of work. It was exciting times, and we had lots of opportunity, as you do at the beginning of an administration. And one day, Secretary Shinseki called me to his office. We were going to place a call to the chairman of our Senate Military Construction Appropriations Subcommittee about our budget. And we were waiting for the senator for the chairman to be available. And I noticed a watercolor on the wall that I hadn't ever seen before. So I asked Secretary Shinseki, "What is that?" And he said, "Well, it's the Lost Battalion." And I said, "The 442nd Go for Broke Regiment?" And he said, "How do you know about them?" And I said, "That's the most decorated regiment in Army history." These gentlemen, the Nisei warriors, many of their parents or even they were incarcerated among Japanese Americans during World War II, and they were the bravest of fighters. And so we talked about that, and I said, they can't even get a postage stamp. Homer Simpson can get a postage stamp, but we can't get one for the Nisei warriors. And I remember we placed the call, we talked about our budget, and the next morning, I don't know whether it's a coincidence or not. I like to think not, but the next morning, Secretary Shinseki called me to his office, and he asked me, he said, "I would be honored if you would allow me to put your name forward to the president to be the Assistant Secretary for Congressional and Legislative Affairs," which of course was an incredible, incredible honor. And I like to think it may be that I showed interest in the things that he knew and that he cared about. And so I'm going to go back to this one. So in March of 2009, at the Women in Military Service Memorial at Arlington National Cemetery, there was an event. And the president was at the event, the secretary was at the event, and we were talking about many matters. And the president said, "No one who has ever served this great nation of ours should go to sleep on our streets at night." And Secretary Shinseki came back to the office and he said, "Well, you heard Commander's intent in that. 0 veteran homelessness. That's our next goal. We've got to get to 0 veteran homelessness." And as Sheriff Carter just referenced earlier, paraphrasing T.S. Eliot, you have to have your reach, sometimes exceed your grasp as leaders. Everybody said, "This is so unrealistic. Who sets a 0 goal today?" So there was skepticism whether chronically homeless people could get to net zero homelessness. And Secretary Shinseki would remind us, and anytime he was talking about it with members of Congress, when people confronted him with skepticism about the goal, he would talk about, he was a soldier. He had recently been Chief of Staff of the United States Army. And he would talk about the people who he grew up with, who he trained to go into service. And he would say, less than 1% of Americans join the United States military. And we immediately absorb them into loyal, high-performing units. We train them, we create an environment for them to succeed and thrive, and we ask them to do the difficult, the challenging, and often impossible things. And you know what? They do it. And yet, at the time, veterans led the nation in homelessness, joblessness, substance abuse, and suicide. And he would say, "Same kids. We know that they can do it. Where have we failed them along the process?" So, I learned from example, and when I say leadership is action, not position, weekly meetings, collaborations, an all-in strategy, everybody in the room. So everybody held one another honest in meeting these goals, working with agencies and partners. And the ultimate achievement is we met the targets in dozens of United States cities. And more importantly, we set up a structure to continue to pursue the goal. So this is a picture of us, grainy though it was, in budget preparation. We spent so much time on preparing our budget and preparing for testimony. Congress is the equivalent of the administration's board of directors. That's how it works. And they give us our budget, they oversee us, and make sure that we're doing what we said we would do. So we took budget preparation very, very seriously. And President Biden will often say, "Show me your budget, and I'll show you your values." So while I was at the Department of Veterans Affairs, we doubled agency funding over my tenure. And I'm going to share with you a few of the best lessons I learned from people, mainly military leaders, is bad news does not get better with age. As a leader, this is a critical point. Handling after-action reviews in a learning culture requires approaching problems without judgment or without defense. And that's easier said than done, believe me. But prolonging getting to a solution or addressing the damage never helped anyone. 2, confrontation is a necessary life skill. And I want you to sit with that for a second on how you feel about the word confrontation. To get to solutions, you often have to have the courage to confront challenging issues, not by controlling or bullying, but by collaborating with people on a solution. What you're not changing, you're choosing. And now, I'll tell you a personal story. So in the midst of this, in August of 2010, I was diagnosed with a high-grade aggressive cancer at a later stage. My 19-year-old daughter had just moved to North Carolina for school. This would change my perspective on everything for an entire lifetime. Treatment I engaged in was absolutely brutal. I can't even begin to tell you. And I continued working hard because the work was a relief and a distraction. We were in the budget season, and as I said, super important. This was our resources to be able to do the work we needed to do for veterans. So during the budget season, we had just finished the first of 4 budget hearings. I was so busy. I didn't take care of myself. I went home after a budget meeting Thursday, and I fell asleep. I became unconscious over the course of the weekend, and a friend, Noelle Brazil, came to check on me. I was rushed to the hospital, and my friends met her there and met me there. She was afraid I was going to die in the car. And when I got to the hospital, which wasn't through the emergency, but through a special entrance, they immediately put oxygen on me and took me to be intubated. And my deputy, Ray Helton, from Veterans Affairs, and Noelle took care of everything, and other friends were there. I was on life support for a few weeks. And that's me in a chemo chair. Look, I have the twins there. That's what they called my dueling BlackBerry/iPhone, was the twins. And I have a synthetic wig that had been burned up and shrunken with making Thanksgiving dinners and Christmas dinners. I went through a lot of wigs in this case. But this is a photograph of me after coming off of life support and having to learn how to walk again, because of course everything had atrophied. And that is me. In fact, it is not a 90-year-old Frenchman with a turquoise beret. And I'm sure she is gone from the earth now, but Barbara Eden, the therapy dog. And that's actually when I looked well. So, I want to share one bit from that about a life lesson that doesn't relate to anything else. But when I was in the hospital, of course, my daughter was so angry. You did this to yourself. How can you work so hard, right? How can you work so hard? And then she told me that a friend of ours had posted on Facebook that I was dying. And if anybody wanted to get word to me before I died, to get a message to my daughter. And remember, you tell me, I'm atrophied. I can't even lift my head. I have no musculature. Everything takes extreme energy. And I remember my daughter telling me that, and I remember anger welling up inside me. How could somebody take my life and put it on social media? And I know the person was well-intended, but I realized at that point the debilitating power of anger. And so the one thing I have for sure taken away is I get angry at very, very little anymore. Hold on one second. Talking so long, I lost my remarks. But courage takes a team sometimes. And the people who supported me, some of them who later I would be with them on their own cancer journeys, like Noelle and Ray, who are no longer with us. So I'm grateful for the life-saving medicine brought to us by America's innovative pharmaceutical industry, the surgeons, the physicians, and the technology. But the love and support from family and friends was as valuable to my own healing as any chemotherapy, radiation, and surgery. Throughout, I kept in my thoughts and prayers, do not take this experience from me, but give me the perspective and the strength to perceive it differently, to use it to empower myself. In this process, was I going to step into love or step into fear? That was solely my choice. I asked God for the strength to step into love, and if that wasn't available, to try to understand the purposefulness of my fear. Sounds like it's easy, but it's probably the hardest thing ever. I came back to health and then recurrence in 2014. The options for treatment, given my past experience with chemotherapy, were limited due to my reaction. And it had been less than 5 years since my prior radiation treatments. So in 2014, I retired from federal service, totally uncertain what would happen next, or would I survive this again? Would it come back? I took some time off for treatment and recovery, and then to contemplate what I might do with my time and energy. You know, my family wanted me to retire and take care of myself. There is post-traumatic stress, but there's also post-traumatic growth and growth from the trauma. I turned to the wisdom of African-American theologian Howard Thurman. Ask what makes you come alive and do it, because what the world needs is people who have come alive. And this is the approach that I took. Now look what I get to do with all that's happened, not in spite of the experience, but because of it. And suddenly, this thing that was so bad actually became a gift. And that gift not only changed my heart, but maybe it can impact others. What needs to be done? What would be the best legacy? And so, I turned to one of the only things that helped me stay grounded in service, was a small weekly reflection group that I'd been a part of, focused on honing virtues and principle-based leadership in public life. I rarely missed it, and I got to lead the organization that hosted them. And so, this is Congressman John Lewis. Here we are in Charleston, South Carolina. The group, members of Congress, over half the House and Senate have been engaged in our work. At the time, It's based on the intersection of your personal values and your public service, focused on reflection, contemplation, engagement with diverse views, and mostly bridging the divides that arise in a thriving democracy. I'm sure you have no idea what I'm talking about there. So, mentored by our board chair emeritus, John Lewis, he used to say that faith is belief that you're already there. 100 years after the Civil War and emancipation, we had not made progress on civil rights for African Americans in nearly every facet of American life. In 1962, only 14% of the population was eligible to vote in Alabama of African Americans. Because they weren't registered to vote, they were unable to serve on juries. For many men and women John Lewis's age, the murder of Emmett Till, who was lynched in Mississippi, and his mother's bold move to publicize and have an open casket show what the murderers had done to her child moved a whole generation of students to step into their rights and challenge the Jim Crow laws of the South. Congressman Lewis was engaged in the Nashville student sit-ins, integrating interstate commerce, which is the Freedom Rides, working in voter education in Mississippi, and marching for the right to vote in Selma, Alabama. Doing it in a nonviolent way that doesn't humiliate the opponent, but seeks to find what's good in the opponent and reconciling the community. The principles of nonviolent social impact were the foundation of the organization's work, and it takes courage to do this. Reflection groups allowed time for contemplation of how members of Congress want to lead themselves and others. And several times a year, we would take civil and human rights pilgrimages with elected leaders, stepping into the footsteps of ordinary people who did extraordinary things at critical moments in our nation's history for inspiration. This is Congressman Lewis in 1963. And this is him leading Barack and Michelle Obama for the 50th anniversary of the Selma to Montgomery marches. This is us in Memphis, 50 years after Martin Luther King was slain there at the Lorraine Hotel. And this is Archbishop Desmond Tutu. We work closely with his work on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. In the center on the right is Pumila Gobodo Madikizela, who was one of the lead psychologists for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and she's flanked by the two survivors in the room for Charleston's Emanuel massacre. We worked with, went to Pittsburgh in the wake of the Tree of Life Synagogue massacre. This is Katsumi Hokkaido, who's one of the 442nd. We did pilgrimages focused on Asian American immigration, Japanese incarceration during World War II, and then the Tulsa Race Massacre Centennial. And we did this to retrace the footsteps of important moments in history where people rose above what they thought that we could accomplish. And that led me to study at Penn and get a master's degree in positive psychology focused on a Thomas Jefferson construct called moral elevation. When you see someone doing something good, right, or just, it makes you want to do something similar. And so we engaged in tough conversations on divides that arise in a thriving democracy of race, religion, region, party affiliation, and viewpoints, and how we can best do that peacefully. This has been my work of a lifetime. And in 2020, this is Congressman Lewis's last walk across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. 2021 gave me a transition to come back into federal service and work with the first Native American Secretary of the Interior. She's pictured here with my prior work. She is the first Native American Secretary of the Interior at a time that's critical in our nation's history. Under the Secretary's leadership, the Road to Healing, a historic 12-stop tour across the country, provided Indigenous survivors the opportunity to share with the federal government their experiences in federal boarding schools for the first time. The Road to Healing events included opportunities to connect survivors with trauma-informed support about the Department of Health and Human Services Indian Health Service and Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. The department also launched an oral history project to document and make accessible to the public the experiences of generations of Indigenous then children who attended the Indian boarding school system. And in 2021, the Departments of Interior, Education, and Health and Human Services launched an interagency initiative to preserve, protect, and promote the rights and freedoms of Native Americans to use and practice and develop their own native languages. She ushered in a new era for tribal self-determination, investing $45 billion into strengthening Indian country. Add that to work that we continue to do to more effectively steward our lands and resources. I have the opportunity to share my experience and wisdom in leading the policy management and budget of the department. We're the foundation of the department and the body that ensures that we do routine things routinely. And I will say that doing work in public service is an incredible honor. I have the opportunity to have impact on a grand scale and exquisite impact on a small scale. It's a chance to envision how to make the greatest nation on earth and its people even better through service. And throughout all this life, I've been able to take my daughter, friends, and family with me on this journey, and I know I can't make it alone. None of us are going to make it alone. And so this is my daughter and my son-in-law, and this year, they welcomed this little guy, little Tommy, Thomas William Stevens, into the world. We love him, as you can well imagine, and I know you all have someone precious to you. Maybe a friend, a child, a spouse, or a parent, someone dear to you. So just for a second, like 5 seconds, close your eyes and think of someone who's dear to you, who you feel that level of protection for. And I want to share a poem with you because I know for sure that we all have the courage to step into love. And it's called Shoulders by Naomi Shihab Nye. A man crosses the street in the rain, stepping gently, looking 2 times north and south because his son's asleep on his shoulder. No car must splash him. No car drive too near to his shadow. This man carries the world's most sensitive cargo, but he's not marked. Nowhere does his jacket say fragile, handle with care. The father's ear fills up with breathing, and he hears the hum of a boy's dream deep inside of him. We're not going to be able to live in this world if we're not willing to do what he's doing with one another. The road will only be long, and the rain will never stop falling. Sometimes the most courageous thing to do is to love and not hate. And that's how I want to live and lead. And I hope it's what you want to fulfill the hope that's etched on Lincoln's memorial from his second inaugural, which is just to the left of where Martin Luther King gave his I Have a Dream speech. With malice towards none, with charity for all, let us strive to finish the work we're in, to bind up the nation's wounds, and do all which may achieve a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations. That will take the kind of courage that I know we're all capable of mustering. Thank you.
Secretary Mooney, Joan, thank you. That was wonderful. All of you have question cards on your tables. If you haven't written one yet, go ahead and write a question down for our speaker and hold it up, and one of our fantastic volunteers will come around and bring that up on stage for us. So, of the many things that I take from your talk, one of them was to picture myself as a student. and to think how neat it would be to follow in your footsteps. So my first question for you is, what advice would you give to the students in the room that would like to have a career in public service? What should they do? How should they prepare themselves for the kind of work you've engaged with?
Well, I think it is find what you love and then pursue it. Find what interests you and makes you come alive. And I was saying earlier that my undergraduate degree is in government and politics, but I often find that in public service, it's super helpful to have a field of interest that you can apply in public service. But there are tremendous range of jobs in federal service, and we're all going to be needed in the days ahead. So I would just pursue your dreams.
I hope all the students in the audience hear that and take that forward. I loved hearing you also reflect on the sort of multi-generational storytelling that shaped your childhood, and I wonder what questions you want Tommy to ask you.
Gosh, I haven't even thought of that. Well, I will say, I want to take him to explore and to learn things that meant something to me. And so my son-in-law has suggested they call me Nona, that I have a Nona and Tommy's Adventure Fund, so I can take him to places that maybe his parents wouldn't take him and do things that are particularly for me.
That's wonderful. One of our audience members would like to know how many women veterans are in the room. Would our women veterans stand up and be recognized here? Thank you for your service. Thank you for your service. Another audience member would like to know, it says that we often learn more from our failures. Could you share a time where failure moved you forward?
Gosh, I feel like it's an interview question. I should have that. You know, it's funny because I look at failure as an opportunity to have tried something and it not being successful. So I try to take the lessons I've learned from failures, and honest to God, I don't know who doesn't fail a lot all the time. We try things out that don't work. In government, we try not to because we're stewards of the taxpayers' dollars. But in general, I take risks. I take risks of things that we might be able to accomplish because otherwise nobody's going to do what I envision. So just me.
And your lessons about courage demonstrate how you don't take failure as a setback, but as a motivation. So I think that came through as well. Another audience member says that from your story, it looks like you had incredible mentors. What do you look for in a mentor? Examples to learn from and work with, or how do you select a mentor?
So there's a couple things. I would advise having a mentor who is more senior to you, a mentor who is a peer, and a younger mentor. And I'll tell you, I mentioned Rotimi Abimbola, who is amazing, but a lot of times I learn so much from Rotimi, not only how to work intergenerationally, but she just knows things that I don't, and she has a different perspective. And the goal is not to kiss up or press down. The goal is to help one another. So I look at, she's mentoring me, I'm mentoring her, and I'm doing that with colleagues. Now, I have a unique background, but I think it's also because I pursued places and professions with people who had similar goals to me or who had similar principled leadership. And so, you know, there are times when you don't jive with someone, doesn't mean you can't enjoy them, but try to build a protective community around you. Like tomorrow morning, I'll lead one of the reflection groups with members of Congress, and they refer to it as an oasis. It's the 1 hour of the week. So you need a group like that. You need many groups like that to keep you centered and focused and encouraged on where you're going to head.
This is a follow-up in some ways on that, and this audience member says that she's been told as a leader or a follower to know her non-negotiables, the things you need to thrive. What are your non-negotiables, and do you have thoughts on this principle of leadership?
God, the non-negotiables. wouldn't be very John Lewis-y of me if I said my non-negotiable is people who have fixed mindsets that think things can't change, and I want to encourage people to be open-minded. There may be people that you disagree with, but we're not going to ever come to agreement if we're not reaching out to one another. So I don't think I have non-negotiables. I think everybody's redeemable. So
That's under negotiation. Yeah, I think that's right. So another audience member comments that you didn't talk a lot about being the only woman in the room, although in many of those pictures you were. So tell us a little bit about why you didn't talk about being a woman in those roles, and if you have any other thoughts on that particular aspect.
this may not be popular, but I can fill a room all 5 feet of me. And I just always looked at myself like a person in a room. I probably did have people who didn't think I could do things because I was a woman or it wasn't a woman's role. I never took that on. And I just plowed through with what I wanted to do. Kind of what Dr. Trump said at the beginning, right? She's like, don't even take it on, just keep moving.
That's wonderful, absolutely. I think this is our last question. But one of the threads through your talk was the power of mobility, travel as a young person, moving around in your career, and that travel as an investment in your own self-development. What should people in the room be learning from that power of mobility?
I think you learn that there's a bright big world out there and nobody's better than anybody else. And when you say travel, I started thinking, I was like, man, they're going to think that I spent a lot of money doing it. I've car camped a lot. I rode the subway in New York City. I stayed in what is the equivalent of public housing with gracious families in Northern Ireland and in the American South. Like, just don't be proud. Get out there and learn. And I've learned from really unexpected people. So be open to conversations and be open to listening.
Thank you so much. Please join me in thanking Secretary Mooney.